Hey, friends. So, welcome to Viewer Question Friday, where I take your questions and attempt to answer them pretty much live. So, if you ever have a question, you can submit it in the Google form that will be in the video description in this video. Last week, I was in Colorado, so I didn't have the opportunity to answer the questions that were last asked last week. So, I will attempt to answer them this week. And I have to say, I love the questions that came in last week. It ranges everything from what do I do with debt before retirement? How do I get over the fear of investing? How do I prioritize where I put my money, whether it's towards building a safety net or investing? And then what is the mindset for spending guilt free and kind of your philosophy around money? So it really spans the range of everything I love to talk about. And I will give my best attempt at answering them. I don't do a ton of research before answering the questions. So this is really just based on my decade plus of thinking a lot about money. I might miss something, or my approach to how I would solve these problems might not work for you. So if you find something that you think would work better, feel free to leave them in the comments. I'm sure I will miss something in answering these, but I'll give it my best attempt and I hope it's helpful for you. Okay, so let's get into the first question. How should I prioritize between investing, building a safety net, and which accounts I'm adding funds to? And so I'm going to read this full question and then we're going to kind of break it apart into different pieces. So I'm currently building my emergency fund to $9,000 for 4 months of expenses while simultaneously maxing my Roth IRA. So that gets a big thumbs up for maxing your Roth. That's awesome. I'm saving $1,050 and then I have another $583 for my Roth every month. This is about half or more of my income. So makes me always really happy. Obviously, you don't have to save half of your income to be successful, but 50% savings rate was always my goal as I was learning to build wealth. So I think this is awesome that this person is at this level. For me as a runner, this is like you're training hard and getting ready for a marathon and you're doing the work. So I think that's awesome and it's great to celebrate. So when my emergency fund is built, I plan on refilling my VIGAX with the 19,000 I used to get out of debt. Saving and refilling my fund will take 24 months. Am I wrong for maxing my Roth while I'm doing this savings and refill plan? Ramsey would tell me to pause investing. I don't want to miss even 4 months of maxing my Roth at this point. I'm 35 years old. Should I focus all $1,600 into emergency and refill, or should I continue down this path? Am I crazy for wanting to refill the $19,000 back into VIGAX as quickly as possible? So, the first thing that I would take note of is I would always prioritize maxing out a Roth every single year. The reason is that when you put money into a Roth, you have already paid tax on that money that's going in. So the cool thing about a Roth is that if you had an emergency and you needed to take money out of a Roth, you can take the contributions that you put in out at any point. It's really like as easy as transferring from a savings account to a checkings account. Now, I would never recommend that you do that because your Roth dollars are the most valuable dollars that you have in your wealth building plan because you've already paid tax on them. They're going to go tax free. And then as they grow, eventually, when you do take money out of them, you'll pay no tax on the gain. So it's not ideal to take money out to cover an emergency. It's the last thing I would want to do, but you can do it. There's really no additional tax, there's no penalties, and it's really easy. So for me, there's no reason to not max it, even if at some point you had to take money out, because you can't really go back in time to max out your $7,000 a year, but you can't always take it out. Okay, so that's part one where I would think about a Roth in conjunction with the account that I have my emergency fund in. Okay, now on deciding when to put money into a emergency fund versus when to start investing. So there is a lot of nuance here. When you're giving broad advice, I think it makes a lot of sense what Dave Ramsey does, where he's really conservative. He says, pay off all your debt, then build a really conservative emergency fund, and then invest. And so it's the step by step by step. I think this question is asking, can you kind of start to blur those lines so that maybe you start investing earlier versus this kind of rigid, do I need to hit my 6 month emergency fund or not? So, in answering the rest of this question, I'll give you a little bit more just nuance around how to kind of think about this in your own situation. And then you can kind of decide on what the right approach is. So, the first thing is that I would actually encourage people to learn how to invest much sooner, even if you're not investing a large chunk of your money. And so, what do I mean by that? So, if you're in debt, and you're working to pay off your debt and you don't have much of an emergency fund, I still think it's good to learn the kind of build the muscle behind investing even while you're working on those things. I think what's important is learning kind of the asset building mindset of putting money into an investment, getting used to the risk that you might lose a little bit of money or you might see that your money is working and your asset is growing. You can do that with 10 bucks, 20 bucks, maybe 5%, let's say, of the total amount of money that you're working with. So I would always encourage people to invest just to get that experience while you're working on these other priorities. In this particular situation, this person has $9,000 and 4 months of living expense already in the bank. Pretty much at this point, you already luckily have any really foreseeable emergency already covered. If you have a car, you're going to be able to afford a car repair. If you have anything that's catastrophic, that's enough money to cover a emergency medical situation. It's enough money to cover an insurance claim. So for me, you've already kind of hit the watermark for covering for an emergency. The next level up in like how you thinking about an emergency fund is this. So emergency funds are really protecting you from large downside risk. So an emergency fund carries an opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is I could have that money invested growing at a higher interest rate, most likely. Now there's downside risk. So you could have your money just sitting in cash and the market tanks and then you look like a genius because you haven't lost as much money. But on average, the potential earnings that you could have in the stock market are higher than the money that you just have sitting in a fund. So the things that I would personally assess as you work towards how many months of income should I replace for my emergency fund? One is that it is carrying for the catastrophic risk of multiple bad things happening to you at once. So the three things that are catastrophic that I worry about happening all at the same time are this. One, I lose my job. Two, the economy is tanking and it's hard to find a replacement job. And three, because the economy is tanking, it's possible that the stock market is also going down. And so this is what happened like in 2008 to 2011. It's what happens during major recessions is that growth has stalled or went down. Companies can't afford to pay people, so they're laying people off. Those people that have been laid off can't find other jobs. And now it's this waiting game. It's like, how long will it take before I'm out of a recession so that I can get back to my basic income level? Now, the other thing that happens, the fourth bad thing, is that when all of that is happening, as you start to draw on investments that are already down. So, how you solve for that problem is really going to look different from person to person. So, one is that you could just have blue skies and wonderful weather. So those things might not happen. Typically black swan events, which are things that people don't see in the market and big issues like that, they are not possible to predict. And so you want enough buffer that if the blue skies go away and you face a big storm, you have enough there to protect you from really accessing the investments that might be declining. But that is just looking at it at a broad level. What it doesn't take into account are a few things. One is that if you are able to vary your living expenses to a degree that this $9,000 that you have, could you make it stretch to instead of 4 months, 6 months? Or are you in a job or career that is more recession proof? Or could you have a lower paying job that you could find quickly because you're able bodied that is able to help you sustain your emergency fund so that you can stretch that money for a longer period of time? So, a lot of times these money decisions come down to how much flexibility you're able to incorporate into your life situation when it comes to how much you're spending and your ability to make money. So, for me, and I'm answering this question to someone that I can already see is kind of scrappy because they're saving 50% of their money. The way I would think about this is I wouldn't have concern prioritizing my investing at the same rate as I'm building my emergency fund because one, I already have 4 months of savings and I'm living on $2,000 a month and I already have almost 5 months of living expenses. And if I lost my job tomorrow and I had to pause all saving and wealth building and I just needed the money to cover my living expenses, how quickly could I come up with alternative income sources to cover my $2,000 a month? So maybe it's like I could find a part time job where I'm earning $1,000 a month while still drawing on $1,000 of my $9,000 emergency fund. Well, at that point, I've extended my emergency fund to actually 8 or 9 months because part of it's coming from the work that I'm doing. But you really have to do this assessment for yourself. And I would do it by doing this. One, where are you at in your career? What skills do you have that are transferable to a different job? Do you already have a resume ready? So, like, if you lost your job, you could find another one easily. That is really what it comes down to. And the more aggressive you need to be on your safety net really comes down to your ability to replace an income. That's kind of a long way of answering your question, but my goal in taking extra time to explain these things is so that you can be thinking about why you're following these rules of thumb and then how to tailor it to your own situation so that you could build wealth more effectively. But to put it succinctly, I would definitely max out your Roth IRA every single year because you can take out the money if you need it in an emergency. I would not feel bad about prioritizing my investing as I build up, let's say, the last 2 months of your 4 month emergency fund. And I wouldn't feel bad about aggressively investing the additional money that you have. Now, I can't tell in this question if it's also asking, should I invest my emergency fund? So, my answer to that is no, you definitely want to keep your emergency fund money outside of an investment into T bills or something that is risk free so that if you needed it in the emergency when everything is going down at the same time, you have money there to support you. Okay, so can you share some tips for us who are planning on buying a home for the first time? I'm 27. I love saving and investing, but the thought of buying a house intimidates me. I'm good with renting for a little while longer, but I want to buy a house one day. I would love to know your thoughts. Okay, so to answer this question, I love real estate. I have done real estate investments in the past. I've been a property manager for 8 years. I like both investing in the stock market and I enjoy investing in real estate. And so, to provide some tips, what I'll do is I'll try to combine some of my personal experience with really some with what I've researched for the last 15 years on real estate. What I would tell you though is decide really on why you're deciding to buy a house. And I would think about this in two camps. One camp is I'm buying a house because it would be a lifestyle decision, a standard of living for myself, and I want to set down roots somewhere at least for a while. And I kind of want to be able to do the things that I enjoy without being bothered by someone who owns the home or apartment that I live in. Okay. So that's the lifestyle side. The real estate investing side is I'm buying a home to increase my wealth. And I don't really care about lifestyle or standard of living. I'm doing it purely to increase my wealth. And how you decide to buy a home, depending on which camp you're in there, looks radically different. There's nothing wrong necessarily with prioritizing a home purchase because it'll make you really happy, even if it's bad for your wealth building. But for me, it's always important that you go in with eyes wide open on the potential impacts one way or the other. So the second tip is really look at where you're at in your career and are you in a place where you have the reasonable expectation that you are going to be somewhere for at least, I would say, 7 years. And here's why: both buying and selling a home are extremely expensive and they're very illiquid. And what I mean by that is you are going to pay fees like you've never paid before. You're going to pay realtors, you're going to pay a broker, you're going to pay the bank for originating your mortgage, you're going to pay closing fees, you're going to pay a title company, you're going to pay somebody to inspect the home. And then when you go to sell, you're going to do it all over again. And in fact, you may pay even more because then you're going to pay the realtor to both sell your home and you're going to pay the realtor who's helping buy the home for prospective people to move in. Not only that, but then the interest that you're going to pay on a 30-year fixed mortgage, which is a mortgage that I would recommend, I used a 7% interest rate. I'm not sure what interest rates are today. Maybe they're a little bit lower than 7%, but it doesn't really matter. One of the things you want to look at is the loan amortization. And what that means is how much are you paying towards the balance of what you owe versus how much are you paying the bank in interest. So, one thing to understand about loans or debt is that you front load the interest payments. So, for a large period of time in the life of a mortgage, you're just paying interest. And so this is interesting. So let's say you bought this home in September of 2025. Let's go out just 10 years. So out 10 years on this balance of $330,000, you would have paid $46,000 in principal. So the balance of your mortgage would have went down $46,000. But the bulk of everything that you've paid is just an interest. So, what's interesting about this is that people do get lucky with homes because in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of appreciation in homes. So, even despite this fact that you're buying a home, they're going up in value so much that people are building wealth. So, none of that should dissuade you from wanting to purchase a home. It's just that I would be clear about the timeline. If I plan to stay somewhere for, let's say, 10 years, I would certainly be looking at owning a home if that's what made me happy. And because I know that over that period of time, hopefully what's worked for me is I've had some level of appreciation. So the value of the home has went up. And I've had it long enough that I've started to pay more principal, and I've kind of smoothed out the just basically loss in fees and interest that I pay on the front end of home ownership. Okay, so a few other tips. I'll go a little bit faster on these. Is I would target around 30% of your income for the mortgage, taxes, and interest on a 30-year mortgage. You could go higher, and this is going to be so dependent. I don't really like rules of thumb like this necessarily. It's just a place to start because it's going to be so dependent on the cost of living in your area. But when I think about wealth building, what I don't want to do is purchase something as an expense. And I do think about most homes as an expense that don't allow me to be able to save and invest anymore. The problem with homes is that the floor, so the bottom that you're going to pay, is just the mortgage payment and taxes and insurance. But that doesn't include all types of home repairs. It doesn't include the furnishings that you'll have for a home. But I think what happens with people that rent, and this is coming from someone that rented and then bought, is I was rudely awakened to the cost of home ownership outside of the mortgage that I was paying to a bank. Unexpected, my AC just went out last night, and now I'm having to pay someone to come inspect it. And oh, I have to replace the entire HVAC system, or there's some plumbing emergency. So there's just the floor of home ownership, everything else on top of that that are repairs or maintenance or everything else. When you rent, that's the landlord's problem. And that's one great thing about renting is I don't if you rent, you don't really have to worry about it. It's like the most that you're going to pay is your rent. And so for me, there's a lot to be said about renting because it reduces the amount of stress. And if it's a smaller percentage of your income, it can allow you to build wealth by investing. If you're interested in optimizing a home purchase for wealth building, there's a few things I would look at. You could think about the cost of making mortgage, insurance, and tax payments. And if those payments are less than the cost of renting, let's say by 10 or 20%, it means that buying a home could be a good deal. It's kind of a break even analysis. So let's say that your mortgage, your insurance, and your taxes are 80% of your rent payment. Then I kind of think about it like, well, that extra 20% that I would have paid to a landlord, I'll put that aside and that'll be for my repairs and maintenance. And then I kind of break even. I think what you're seeing in a lot of areas, and I haven't looked at real estate recently, so I'm out of touch, is that I think rental prices are going down and prices for homes have remained high with these sticky interest rates. And so people are actually paying much more. So the deal is actually better on the rental side than it is for a home. But that's going to vary from city to city. So you kind of want to do that analysis. That's one way I would look at it. Going back to kind of the 30% of my income goes towards my home payment, there's a risk of becoming what you might have heard of as being house poor. And it's really easy to do because brokers, you'll have way more access to debt than you should really make use of. So I would always keep that 30% target for myself. And then when I'm looking at homes, like let's say in a neighborhood or in a line of homes, I don't want to buy the home that is the most expensive on that block. Instead, I'm looking at homes that are really at the lower end of price compared to their nearby homes. Because in the event that you have a crash in the real estate market, the homes that are most expensive are going to be the ones that are hardest to sell. And if you have appreciation, there's potential that the lowest priced home has more room to grow than being the highest priced home in a neighborhood. I would also target areas that may feel like it's living below your means. And I actually really love blue collar areas. One of the things, a book I really like that helped shape my thinking when I first started was The Millionaire Next Door. And they tell this amazing story about this guy. He was this high powered lawyer, made all this money, and they kept upgrading the home that they were in. And they found themselves to be more and more miserable. And the reason why is because they were always comparing themselves to what they called the Joneses. There's always somebody that made more money than them, that had a nicer house and nicer things. And if you're always comparing yourself in these neighborhoods, it's really easy to become unhappy. In that story, that person moved to a much cheaper area and all of the stress went away because now you didn't have this constant comparison. So there's also some emotional decisions around where you decide to buy that I would think about. Then the last thing that I would say is that my favorite way to look at home purchasing, and a lot of people don't talk about this, is what's known as house hacking. And this is where you buy a home and you can either rent different rooms, or you have a studio apartment that you're renting, or you buy a duplex where you live on one side and you rent out the other. This can make living in certain areas much more affordable because you're splitting the cost with other people. Now, if you're on this lifestyle side of home purchasing, that might not appeal to you because you're like, it's my space. I want to do what I want to do with my space. There's nothing wrong with that. But house hacking is actually in a pretty incredible way, especially in this day where interest rates are high, homes are, in my opinion, kind of overpriced to kind of share the load. And it really shifts a lot of the math in your favor if you're okay with kind of this shared living space arrangement. Okay, so next question. How do I overcome my fear of investing and losing money? I have $27,000 in a high yield savings account. I don't have any big purchases coming up, but I have the fear of losing money if I transfer into a brokerage account. One of the things that I would tell you to get over the fear of investing is that I would actually have the fear of not investing be the greater fear. So the fear of not investing is that you have a high yield savings account. That's great. So hopefully that's earning enough that it's helping offset inflation partially. But what you want to do is look at a broader picture of your life. So let's say that you have the goal of becoming a millionaire. You most likely will not become a millionaire unless you invest. And the reason for that is that you need to be able to take risk to allow your money to compound at a rate that allows it to grow enough for you to get to your goal. So let me show you what I mean by this. So let's say you have $29,000 and you just wanted to let that grow for 30 years. Let's use a 7% interest rate for the stock market, compounded annually. By the end of 30 years, that money will grow potentially to $220,000. Let's use a high yield savings amount of 4%. That same money will grow to $94,000. So less than half of basically what the money would have done if it would have been allowed to grow for the next 30 years in the stock market. Now, that doesn't mean there's not risk. In fact, the reason that you're paid more is because you're taking risk. But if you have a long-term goal, the risk is actually worse that you don't get to the number that you need. And let me show you another way to think about this. So let's say that you just wanted to start investing and you had a $1,000 contribution every month for the next 30 years at 4%. So after 30 years, you've invested $1,000 a month, but you're scared to invest. This money would be $673,000. And in fact, nearly or actually over half of it, well, a little less than half, would have been only your contribution. Basically, half of all of this money would have been from your sweat equity from work. Now, let's say that we earn a 7% interest rate conservatively in the stock market and we invest that same amount of money would be worth $1,133,000 and you would have put in your $360,000. But here, that money will have been working for you and would have earned more than you would have actually had to work for. So in this example, the larger risk, let's say you did want to be a millionaire after 30 years, is that if you are so scared of investing, you don't hit your goal. That is the biggest risk I think for most people, is that you don't meet your goal because you don't invest. Now that doesn't mean that bad things can't happen. Yes, you can lose money. Yes, the stock market could go down for a prolonged period of time. And yes, you could be an unlucky person that you retire straight into a long-term recession and all of this. But the fact is that if you don't try at all, you're most likely not going to be successful. So that's the first way that I think about risk, is meeting the goal that you have in mind. And the problem is that most people don't have goals. So they invest and they just want more money, but they don't really understand like what it's for. So that's the other point, is that your $29,000 in a high yield savings account might be doing exactly what it should be doing. So let's say that $29,000 is for a home down payment that you want to buy a home in 2 years. I would not recommend that you invest it, because we don't know where the stock market's going to be in a year or two. And so that money could actually be doing exactly what it's meant to do, which is being in a safe place for a goal that you have in the short term. But if it's more of a question of, I have a long-term wealth goal for the next 20 or 30 years, and I just have more and more money sitting in a high yield savings account as I work, that money is not working for you for that goal. And that's the way I would kind of think about risk. Now, the other part about risk is that we do have to be really thoughtful about our own emotional makeup. And so some people are just more risk averse and they're really scared of loss. You can take Vanguard's risk assessment. So you hit start the quiz. And what these are basically questions that will try to assess your risk makeup, and then they will recommend how cautious or defensive to be about investing. Now, there are studies out there that kind of debunk a lot of these quizzes, because what you hypothetically might do in a situation looks a lot different than what you actually do in the face of the unknown and real loss. The two other things that I want to hit on in this question, one is that you should really understand what you're investing in. And hopefully, when you have a clear understanding for what you're investing in, it gives you the confidence to want to invest. So, like for instance, I only invest in broad market index funds. And what that is basically I buy little parts of every single company in the United States. And no matter what happens, some companies fail, some companies do well. I earn the average of all of those companies. So for me, I have a lot of conviction in the fact that companies over the long term are going to create value. And so when I buy an index fund and I'm buying little parts of every company, I'm telling myself I'm becoming an owner of this company and I'm sharing in the profit of that company. I'm also sharing in the loss if something happens, but that doesn't dissuade me from wanting to invest. So, like when I go and buy a share of VTI, which is a total stock market index fund, I'm telling myself, I just bought a little share of Apple. Apple, they make these amazing phones, and all of the employees at Apple, whether they're happy or not, they're coming to work every day and they're all striving to do a good job at this company to create products and services that people will buy. And all of their executives are richly compensated, and they're all trying to make sure that the company is working towards being successful. So for me, it's not necessarily focused on just the price of a stock or all of the stocks. It's the first principle of what investing is putting my money into companies that are striving to do well, and then kind of being okay with whatever happens in that. So that's one way I would kind of get past the fear of investing, is look at what is it that you're actually investing in. And then the third thing I would say is that you don't have to dive into the deep end all of a sudden. So There's two ways to kind of start investing your money. Say you wanted to invest your $29,000, but you were scared of putting it all in today because you're worried about the fact that it might go down tomorrow. So what you could do is you could decide, well, I want to be fully invested in my plan in the next 6 months. So you divide 29,000 by 6, that's about $5,000 for the next 6 months. So then you could invest $5,000 this month, $5,000 this next month, and then $5,000 thereafter. If you were too worried about investing $5,000 a month, try it with $1,000 and just kind of get used to seeing your stock investments go up and down. Now, the truth is the optimal way to invest is typically what they call lump sum investing, and that's just putting all of the money that you have that's ready to invest into whatever investment you have conviction in. And there's nothing wrong with that. The math does tell you that that's the right answer. But if you're a brand new investor that is scared and the fear of loss is so strong, what the worst situation would be is you put all $29,000 in, and then something crazy happens in the world and you have a 20% decline in the market. Then you would have lost $6,000. And you not being used to losing money for a short term period of time, you could freak out and then sell everything. And then that would be the worst thing that you could do. Now, for me, if I had $29,000 and I put it in the market and it decreased by 40%, I know that that's just kind of what can happen. And if I have another 30 years of investing time, I just kind of ignore it and just let it go. But my investing makeup and emotion behind why I invest is most likely different than yours. So there's two kind of angles to that. I would probably recommend for you to do dollar cost averaging where you invest a fixed amount every month and then just get used to that experience. The one thing I do want to caution you on is you don't want to gamble in the stock market. So I would not put all of that money into like one company. I would not make a risky bet that's gambling on like what's going to happen in the short term. That's not really, in my opinion, what investing is. And so that actually scares me too. I don't invest in individual companies. I don't make risky speculations on things, and that's not how you should, in my opinion, invest. And you don't have to do that to be successful over the long term. Okay, so next question. So I screwed up and I bought a motorhome. The loan is $150,000 at 7% for 20 years. I'm 62. I have $800,000 in a 401k. I feel like I should withdraw to pay it off. One reason is then I would have an asset that I can sell. And the other reason is so I can retire at 65 debt free. So the first thing I would say is, especially with a sum of money that large, I would recommend that you build a broader retirement plan before you make a decision. So the $800,000 in a 401k, is that all of your assets, or do you have other investments sitting outside of a 401k? Do you have a home already? Or is this motorhome something that you're going to live in and kind of live what I would consider a very fun and exciting life of just living in the motorhome and traveling the country? So the reason I would do that is I would want a better understanding for what your total assets are and then what your income in retirement is going to look like. So I did a quick calculation at that interest rate. What I was getting with the motorhome was probably costing around $1,100 a month, depending on how you plan to draw on Social Security and your other assets. The amount of money that loan is in proportion to your fixed income would start to kind of sway me one way or the other about what I would decide to do. Now, there's one camp, and you mentioned this, I should withdraw to pay it off. The reason that this might make sense closer to retirement is you have less time for your money to compound as you get older. And what you're faced with a loan at 7% is a fixed interest rate that's relatively high at 7%. And because of your age, your $800,000 won't be able to compound for as long as someone that is in, let's say, their 20s. The problem with motorhomes, and I didn't know about this about motorhomes until I kind of looked online today when I read this question, is that they do depreciate significantly, similar to kind of like a car. So when I was looking up, you can expect a motorhome to depreciate about 40% over 6 to 7 years. So that $150,000 that you paid for, let's say in 7 years, you could sell that RV for $75,000. If you were to pay it all off today, really what you're going to do is maybe about half of that amount of money is going to be basically depreciated over the next few years. The other problem, and this is probably the most important point, at least on my take on this, is that if you pull out money in your 401k, you're going to pay tax on that amount. So my gut on this is that I would not pull out $150,000 out of an $800,000 balance, because depending on what your tax rate is now as you work, you're going to pay the government a lot of money on pulling that money out now. And then a lot of that money is going to just disappear as depreciation hits that vehicle over the next few years. So without knowing your personal situation, and my recommendation is you do planning around what your income's going to be in retirement when you're planning to draw social security, so that you get comfort around this purchase. My gut would tell me what I would do is I would tell myself that this is basically my mortgage, and I would think about it just as like a rent payment, and I would just forget about it. I would pay it every month, and then I would really enjoy it. Yeah, I bought it new, and I'm paying some depreciation over the next few years, but I'm going to enjoy it. If you're 62, I'm going to be doing this until like I'm 70 or in my 70s. I don't think there's anything wrong with it at that point, because you're getting to live a fun lifestyle. And if this is a replacement for a home or place that you're renting, and you just look at it as a rent payment, to me that's not that bad. An $1,100 place to live in a lot of places these days is like a studio apartment. So it's kind of a fun thing that you get to do. The one thing that I would question a bit in the question that was submitted is, then I would have an asset I could sell. I don't view this really as an asset. I view it more as a liability. And that's not, then there's nothing wrong with that. Generally, I think about assets that will appreciate in value, meaning that they're going to be most likely worth more over time. Whereas this is something that's going to depreciate and be worth less over time. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, especially as you're drawing personal enjoyment from it. That's what our money should be doing for us. But I wouldn't be really that quick to sell out of things that are assets, like part ownership in companies, to think that I'm buying an asset like this. The other thing I would say is that if you already have a home and you're paying a mortgage, and this is just more of kind of like a luxury purchase that you're going to use occasionally, then I would probably get rid of it right now. And I don't know what that would mean. I don't know the RV market. It might mean that if you bought it at 150, I looked up that RVs depreciate about 20% in the first year. That means that maybe you could only sell it for 120 grand. That means that you would have to eat the $30,000. If it's just a luxury that you're not using very often, then that would be another option that I would at least have on the table, and then see what that tells you in your gut, because that might be the most financially prudent thing to do depending on the rest of your situation. But I think after kind of talking through this, my answer would be, I'm 62 years old. I'm about to retire, and I'm going to enjoy this thing for the next 15 years. And I like kind of traveling the country and having that experience, which I think is really cool. And I'm going to actually save some money, because now I'm not paying rent or a mortgage. Or if you own your home, you could rent out your home, and then that could cover this motorhome, and you kind of have a cool life out of it. And then the other thing is that interest rates might be coming down, so then you could always refinance. Of course, that pushes out the payments, but that's just another way that you could think about it. I don't think my first thing to do would be sell out of a 401k, especially because of taxes. You're going to get hit really hard on that. One of the things that you want to do in your retirement planning is think about withdrawals that keep you below certain income levels, so that you're not getting hit with a large amount of income in any one year. Okay, so next question. What do you spend guilt-free on? I love this question, so I wanted to end with it. Everyone has a different philosophy on money. I'm curious, what are the one or two things you happily splurge on without guilt? And what's something that you surprisingly are frugal about? What's your top piece of advice for finding that balance between enjoying your money now and saving for the future? So I love this question, because I think for most everyday people. When I talk about working class and middle class people, what we're really talking about when we're getting down into the weeds on what money really does for us is getting really intentional about where our dollars go. So one of my first videos, which I am going to record at one point because the audio is terrible, what talked about this idea that when you exchange your time for money, you can think about money as an abstraction for your life's time. So as an example, if I work for $20 an hour, that means that basically every minute that I spend at work, a minute of my life's energy is like 33 cents. And so for big purchases, what I think about is how much of my life's energy am I giving up or exchanging for this purchase? And is that a worthy exchange for my time? I think money's really fascinating because you can always trade your time for money. So you can always make more money. But what you can't do is you can't do it the opposite way. It's not as though you can trade your money for additional time in your life. And so from me, my philosophy is being very thoughtful and intentional about what I decide to exchange my that time money exchange for. I'm a frugal person, and it's not because I'm operating from a sense of lack. It's that I'm working always to kind of train myself to disconnect the idea that in order to be happy, I need to buy something. That's a big trap in consumerism, is that I desire a car and then I buy the car, and then in 2 years I'm not happy with the car anymore, and now I think that the answer to my problems is to buy another car. It's for the most part, it's just a trap. Okay. So that's at least my opinion on it. So when it comes to finding balance, it's interesting because you might think from that then I'm not happy to spend money on anything. It's actually the opposite, because then when I get to spend money on something, I've put more effort into the act of trying to enjoy it. And because of that, it's almost like you get to savor something more. I think savoring is actually an interesting concept, is like how much do you enjoy one thing? Almost like I'm a fast eater, but like some people savor their food, which I think is good. It's like how much enjoyment are you able to extract out of the things that you purchase? And actually by getting really intentional about this exchange, you extract more enjoyment than someone. And I've met people like this. I've met people that make $12 million a year, and then they complain that they only make $8 million a year. And yet everything that they do, they don't really enjoy it. At that point, it's like you're not really enjoying things anymore. You're just kind of like checking off experiences. Something that I find really interesting about ultra wealthy people, and I've been around them, is that they're just kind of bored. Like that's kind of something that you'll actually see in literature and movies that might talk about wealthy people, is that they always have this striving for more exotic experiences. It's almost a sickness, because you train yourself that the only way to almost live a well lived life is by more extravagance, more comfort, more convenience. And I just think I kind of reject, personally, this is my personal philosophy. I just reject all of that. For me, when I was around it, I didn't find that to really compel me to want to earn more money, because especially those people that earn that much money, it comes with, at a base level, an extreme amount of stress. These people are so focused on work that they're almost like just plugged into it 24/7. But then also a lot of times, I don't want to generalize and say all of the time, but for many of them, it also comes with what I would consider some moral hazards around things that you will do for money that for me just don't work from a values perspective. And I'll share a few different quotes that have kind of stuck with me throughout life. One is from Meditations. It was written by Marcus Aurelius, one of the most famous Stoic books on Stoicism, which I would recommend. There's criticisms of Stoicism, which is fine. What I would not do is just get rid of it altogether. The quote is, "Don't set your mind on things that you don't possess. as if they were yours, but count the blessings you actually possess and think how much you would desire them if they weren't already yours. And then you have to look out because he says this next part, but watch yourself that you don't value the things that you have to the point of being troubled if you should lose them. So, what he talks about a lot is this appreciation for what you have while being detached enough that those things don't take over your life, meaning that they become everything that you think about. So for me, my philosophy on money and spending is kind of centered on three ways. One, I have limited time on in the earth, and I'll be thoughtful about how much of my time I give to material things, and also how much I get attached to those material things, like Marcus Aurelius talks about. And then I'll be careful that those things don't become kind of owners of me. For me, money comes down to control and power. And I'm always very thoughtful about that influence in my life and who I allow to control me when it comes to the things that I get attached to. So, what do I splurge on without guilt? So, things that I spend happily on, I would say that one of the things that I try to save for is travel and experience. So, most of when I look back in my life, the things that I remember are not because I spent a lot of money to do it. It's like who I was with and really who I was interacting with that made the experience worthwhile. So the way I splurge without this guilt is, let's say I wanted to go to Japan or travel to Europe and I'm going to spend a year where I'm consciously saving and investing and building wealth, but I'm also going to put a little money aside to do this thing that means a lot to me and that will expand my experience of the world, and I'll get to meet fascinating people, and or I'll get to spend time with whomever I'm traveling with. That's something that I would never trade for anything. I'll tell you, when I did travel to Japan in my early 20s, one of the things I did, I spent $300 on a meal for myself, but it was at this really fancy sushi restaurant, and I remember the food was amazing. But what I remember the most was that I was the only American there, and nobody else really spoke English, but we had this great time because I was in this shared table with maybe about 10 people, and we were all just having this really kind of fun time learning about each other. And that's what I remember. It wasn't necessarily the really expensive dinner, but it was the experience with the people. But reality is that I have a lot of memories like that that didn't have the fancy dinner, but it was because I had an experience that I remember that was meaningful with people. And really, at the end of the day, I think that's for me what really matters. I had another friend, and he paid me a compliment. He didn't know he paid me a compliment. Is he's like, Greg's so cheap, but you really love spending money on this certain thing, and that's exactly what it's all about. Is like if you're prioritizing money on what means the most to you, you're necessarily deprioritizing money on other things. And so once I've decided what I'm going to prioritize and I deprioritize everything else, I don't have guilt about what I decide to spend because that's kind of what I've decided to prioritize. And I've done all the other things that help me with my wealth building as well. So what I'm surprisingly frugal about are things that don't deliver that value to me. One thing is cars. I'll be a little bit overly dramatic and I'll say I think most cars are pretty terrible when it comes to wealth building. It's like what most people spend all of the potential that they could have on wealth building on, and they depreciate, and you lose a lot of your wealth building on them. So I'm very frugal about a car. I'm also very frugal about clothing. I can't remember the last time I've spent any significant amount of money on clothes, and that's really because it's just it's not doing anything for me. Now, you might prioritize clothing and you might really enjoy it, and there's nothing wrong with that. I think for me, what I try to do is I try to have one or two things that mean a lot to me, and then most everything else I just don't care enough to want to make that time exchange for. The top advice for finding balance for yourself, I've given you a little light into kind of the values that I think about when when it comes to money. I wish that when I was young, I would have done kind of the soul searching. And it's I don't have guilt around this because when you're young, these are just probably things that you don't think about. But I wish I would have done this sooner. Is like the question is not how much money can I make? It's how much money do I need to have enough to live a life that I'm content with? And then finding ways to find experience and enjoyment outside of money. I think one of the things that's hard in our culture is that you're just going to be pumped full with messaging that says the only way that you get to enjoy life is by spending. And I might come out overly strong on this because maybe I'll be a voice that argues against it for someone. I just don't find that a lot of enjoyment in life comes from the continual need for more when it comes to with money. But for me, the more that I can find contentment and enjoyment while disconnecting the feedback loop of I need more money to spend more money to be happy, I'm always trying to bend that curve. And then when I do decide to spend money and enjoy life and just let loose or whatever, it's really intentional. And then it's always in the mindset that I probably don't need as much money as I think to be able to enjoy life. Like one thing I see often with younger people is I don't want to save and invest my money now because I'm young, I have my youth and I want to live life. That's true. However, like if you rent a car, you can rent a car for like $100 a day and you split the car with 5 people and you go do a road trip and you go hiking and you see different places and you stay in a motel and you're like you're kind of scrappy about how you do it. You can have pretty incredible experiences that you'll remember forever without spending a lot of money. And that's kind of where I come down to trying to find that balance. I never want to be so restrictive that I just feel like, and this is a trap, that I can't be happy in the moment that I'm in. That I did fall into that trap for quite a few years. It's almost like I'm going to trade happiness now for happiness in the future. The deeper lesson is like how can I be happy in both periods? And if you can do that, you've kind of won the game because then you're going to be happy with not having a lot of money and you're going to be happy with having a lot of money, but you'll kind of have the Marcus Aurelius mindset that you're not super attached to it to the point where it owns you, but you're also able to enjoy it. So it's this really fine balance that you kind of grow from a mindset perspective over time. And then really tactically what that looks like for me, again, I tried to save 50% of my money and invest it. So then what I had left over is what I was learning to enjoy. And so I was able to kind of balance both. Now, that might be too aggressive of a saving rate for many people. So then you can kind of scale it back to the point where you get to a place you can enjoy life while saving for the future. I would encourage people to probably aim for, at a minimum, a 25% savings rate, unless you're at an income level that's so low that you're just not able to make ends meet. And at that point, then I would focus more on how do I find skills and master something that allows me to be paid more so that I can then kind of be able to enjoy life and not be stressed out about making a rent payment every month while putting some away for the future. So thanks for tuning in to another week of questions. If you have questions, like I said, you can ask them in the Google form that I will leave in the description. I will add chapters. That's been a frequent comment since I know these videos can go long. If you want to find different parts of it, I'll be more prescriptive with that. And I would love to hear from you if you have comments on any of the questions or I missed something in my answers or if something was helpful to you. Feel free to leave them in the comments. I read everything that people leave for me. So I hope you have a great Friday and a good weekend.